What do you do if your marriage is just not working? Neither of you cheated, you just don't want to have sex with each other, you've simply grown apart, or are dissatisfied with your relationship. Maybe you try marriage counseling, time apart, or more time together. Perhaps you choose to get a dog together, or even to have a child. But after all alternatives are expended, you will likely file for a divorce. Prior to 1969, when California was the first state to legalize no-fault divorce, couples who wished to separate had to go to extremes. One would have to give a reason accepted by the law to dissolve a marriage, such as abandoning a spouse, cheating, or being unable to fulfill marital duties. It also made it difficult, if not impossible, for one to decouple from an abusive spouse, as men were typically in charge of the finances and social pressure could make it difficult for a woman to find independence. After all, it wasn't until 1974, when the Equal Credit Opportunity Act passed, that women in the United States were granted the right to open a bank account on their own. And it was incredibly common for women to be fired for being pregnant, making it difficult to retain economic independence after getting married. No-fault divorce is an important right for women, as without it, women are essentially treated as the property of their husbands and had to be relinquished in order to separate. Some like to argue that no-fault divorce led to an attack on the American nuclear family. But in a study, Wolfers discovered that while more people got divorced after these new laws passed, dissolution rates leveled out after 10 years. It was simply bottled up demand. If we go back to fault divorce only, women will be trapped in marriages, leading to rising rates of suicide and intimate partner violence. As since 1969, studies have shown no-fault divorce correlates with a reduction in female suicides and a reduction in intimate partner violence. A 2004 paper by economists Betsy Stevenson and Justin Wolvers found an 8 to 16% decrease in female suicides after states enacted no-fault divorce laws. They also noted a roughly 30% decrease in intimate partner violence among both women and men, and a 10% drop in women murdered by their partners. And yet, in 2024, the newest target for conservatives is no-fault divorce.
Here's the clip of Crowder. This man has dedicated his whole fucking life to this image of him being a good Christian heterosexual man.
Since 2021, I've been living through a horrendous divorce. This was not my choice. My then wife decided that she didn't want to be married anymore.
Yeah, dude, you fucking suck. Who's surprised, man?
And in the state of Texas, that is completely permitted.
First of all, yeah, so woke-ass liberal shithole Texas has these insane lib laws that says your wife can leave you if she wants to.
I've always believed that children need a mom and a dad, that divorce is horrible, but in today's legal system, my beliefs don't matter.
What?
In Texas, divorce is permitted when one party wants it, period.
Why do you keep saying that? If you suspect that your wife is plotting to leave you, you can actually handcuff her to the radiator and have a priest come and do an exorcism until she agrees to stay with you.
As reported by Miss Magazine, conservative commentator Steven Crowder has been vocal about his disdain for no-fault divorce. A video of him in a verbal exchange with his wife ordering her to be disciplined was leaked recently. It begs the question, do some Republicans want to abolish no-fault divorce so they can keep their wives captive and under control?
The far right came up with a new scheme to attack women's freedom. This time they're coming after divorce. No-fault divorce became legal as early as 1969. It's what allowed millions of people to file for divorce without having to prove there was marriage misconduct, like adultery or abuse. You know when you see celebrities filing for divorce because of irreconcilable differences? That's no-fault divorce. But now some conservatives are trying to take this right away, claiming that no-fault divorce destroys the sanctity of marriage and that the system is rigged against men, especially if children are involved. A lot of this conversation has been driven by so-called men's rights activists online. But some right-wing politicians are beginning to take it up too. Last year, the Republican Party of Texas even petitioned to rescind unilateral no-fault divorce laws and support covenant marriage. While no-fault divorce laws are still intact, the rising backlash against them is worrisome, especially for women. Prior to no-fault divorce laws, the process of dissolving a marriage was often adversarial and even traumatic. In the early days of divorce proceedings in the 1800s, America's laws closely mirrored those of England. Husbands could file for divorce solely due to adultery, but women had to prove more had happened than that. Proof of abuse, Rape or desertion was often not enough to be granted a divorce. In some places, there were even laws in place that determined the number of times a man could assault his wife before she was allowed to divorce him. And that's if divorce was even allowed in the first place, because in some places, it wasn't. It wasn't until 2010, just 13 years ago, that all 50 states adopted no-fault divorce laws. And these laws do have benefits. States that enacted these divorce laws saw female suicide rates decline by approximately 20%. From 1976 to 1985, states with no-fault divorce laws also saw domestic violence rates drop by 25 to 50%. Murder rates of women by intimate partners fell by 10%. Like many recent anti-abortion bills we've seen, attacking no-fault divorce is another way to restrict women's personal freedom and rewind the hard-won gains gender equality advocates have made over the past few decades. Taking away no-fault divorce isn't just going backwards, it's downright dangerous.
Crowder said the comments were taken out of context and went public with his divorce, saying, "Since 2021, I've been living through what has increasingly been a horrendous divorce. No, this was not my choice. My then wife decided she didn't want to be married anymore, and in the state of Texas, that is completely permitted." In addition to the Texas Republican Party, whose 2022 platform called on the legislature to rescind unilateral no-fault divorce laws and support covenant marriage, Republican Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio picked up the argument on the campaign trail last September, stating, "One of the great tricks that I think the sexual revolution pulled on the American populace is the idea that, well, okay, these marriages were fundamentally, they were maybe even violent, but they certainly were unhappy. And so getting rid of them and making it easier for people to shift spouses like they changed their underwear, that's going to make people happier in the long term." This isn't the only law on the ballot for 2024 that infringes upon personal rights and women's liberation. The ability to control one's reproduction is an important right for women, as controlling reproduction is at the core of patriarchy, which is driven by capitalism and the desire to ensure one's legacy through controlling the sexuality of women to maintain that one's property is passed down to his sons and not the offspring of another.
So I've recently been rereading Gerda Lerner's The Creation of Patriarchy, which is a feminist/anthropologist attempt at answering the profound question of how did misogyny and gender oppression originate. So I thought it would be cool to make a video sharing some of Lerner's key insights and my impressions of them as a Marxist feminist. Right off the bat, Lerner makes it clear that patriarchy was not created by a singular event, but rather through a 2,500-year process. According to her anthropological research, this process began in ancient Mesopotamia sometime during the agricultural revolution. Due to the increased focus on production, population control became a necessity, and Lerner speculates that this is where the exchange of women began. Such an exchange therefore reified women's reproductive capacity as a separate commodity rather than an aspect of a whole person. It additionally required kinship structures to transition from matrilineal to patrilineal, therefore placing men at the head of the basic family structure. As Lerner lays out her explanation, she makes it a point to make it clear that this development was not a natural result of biological differences between men and women. We know this because sexual divisions of labor actually predate the formation of patriarchy and existed in rather egalitarian hunter-gatherer societies. Lerner further explains, "I want to stress that my acceptance of a biological explanation holds only for the earliest stages of human development and does not mean that a later sexual division of labor based on women's mothering is natural. On the contrary, I will show that male dominance is a historic phenomenon in that it arose out of a biologically determined given situation and became a culturally created and enforced structure over time." I think this part is important because along with Lerner's insistence that women were just as active in the development of patriarchy as men, it places her research in direct contradiction against the popular radical feminist conception of patriarchy, which tends to view it as a natural result of man's inherent need to dominate or whatever. But what's interesting to me is that Lerner also goes directly against the Marxist conception as well. Engels famously stated that the world historic defeat of the female sex came as a direct result of the formation of private property. But Lerner attests that it's the reverse that is true. It was the control of women's sexuality that allowed for the formation of private property in the first place. At least according to Lerner, the first appropriation of private property was the appropriation of the labor of women as reproducers. And as a Marxist feminist myself, I found this disagreement between Engels and Lerner as definitely very thought-provoking. I'm no anthropologist, so I can't say who's more correct. I imagine that declaring a definite sequence of events during the Neolithic era is difficult. Still, Lerner's work isn't in total tension with Marxism. She ultimately views the transition to patriarchy as the result of changes in the production process and the formation of opposing classes, men and women. And that's another important insight, Lerner herself, that class is not a separate construct from gender, rather class is expressed in gendered terms.
Without control of one's reproductive ability, woman is condemned to the detrimental health effects of continuous pregnancy, which drains not just her physical health, but her mental health as well. Shulamith Firestone argued in her Dialectic of Sex, The Case for Feminist Revolution, that the fact that most women of childbearing age would be caught up in a constant cycle of pregnancy, childbirth, and nursing small children meant that women became dependent upon men for provision of the necessities of life, such as food and shelter, and excluded them from other social functions. This created the first class division among humans: male producers, female reproducers. As birth control became more widespread, as what happens with every wave of feminism, pushback arose in the form of the Comstock Act, which defined contraceptives as obscene and illicit, making it a federal offense to disseminate birth control through the mail or across state lines.
On April 7th, a Texas judge issued a ruling saying that the FDA needed to withdraw its approval of the abortion medication pill mifepristone, which has been safe and on the market for 23 years. But he did so under the 1873 Comstock law. So this is for all of you wondering what the hell that is. So Anthony Comstock was basically someone who was horrified by pornography and vice, and he believed that if contraception was legal, it would lead people to do bad things, to be lustful and lascivious. So in 1873, he convinces the federal government to pass the Comstock Law, which defines all contraception and abortion information as obscene and bans any obscene material from being sent through the mail or across state lines. So it basically makes birth control illegal if it's being sent through the mail or across state lines. Other states pass their own versions of these things, making contraception basically illegal within those states. Comstock becomes a special agent for the U.S. Postal Service. He will arrest people. They will serve massive prison time, big fines for violating this thing. One of the women he arrests is Ezra Haywood for her book, Cupid's Yoke, which argues that women should be able to control their own bodies. And the courts ask, would any part of this work corrupt minds open to moral influence? They say yes, so she is convicted. He will also arrest doctors for writing explanations of how pregnancy works and what can be done to prevent it. So if that is sent through the mail or across state lines, it is illegal under the Comstock Act. Margaret Sanger, of course, the mother of the birth control movement, begins pushing against this in the early 20th century. In 1919, she opens an illegal birth control clinic testing these laws, and we end up with the Crane decision that says that birth control can be legal if prescribed by doctors and for therapeutic purposes, which mainly means for disease prevention. In 1929, we get an expansion on this, that spacing out between births is a legitimate medical treatment that can be part of that therapeutic measure. Then in 1936, we have a case called U.S. versus One Package, which is U.S. versus One Package of Japanese pessaries, which are a form of barrier method birth control. And this is Sanger again. She is violating the Tariff Act of 1930, which has incorporated some of that Comstock law that declares all contraception illegal. And so the courts come back and actually say that doctors are not applicable to this, that they can still send birth control information and birth control itself, both through the mail and interstate, and they can bring it into the country, that it does not apply to doctors. And that's a really big deal. The next big case is Griswold versus Connecticut in 1965, in which the state of Connecticut arrests Estelle Griswold, the executive director of Planned Parenthood, for distributing contraception. The Supreme Court finds that law to be unconstitutional. It's unconstitutional to restrict access to birth control because it interferes with a married woman's right to privacy. And as of Griswold, Comstock is dead. Comstock dies in 1965 because of the Griswold ruling. But of course, Dobbs overturns Roe, which is based on the same thing as Griswold. And now we have a Texas judge trying to revive Comstock. Yay.
Access to the pill was revolutionary for women, as the estimates suggest that access to the pill before age 21 reduced the likelihood for becoming a mother before age 22 by 14 to 18%, and increased the extent of 26 to 30-year-old women's labor force participation by approximately 8%. At the intensive margin, women with early access worked at least 68 more annual hours at ages 26 to 30. These findings do not challenge the validity of past research on the relationship between the number of children and women's labor supply. Rather, they are consistent with the notion that the pill catalyzed changes in labor force participation through the mechanism of birth timing. By providing a low-cost means of delaying childbearing, oral contraception allowed women to remain in school, pursue longer-term careers, and work more in the paid labor force during ages historically associated with child-rearing. That's not to say that birth control is perfect. Just like most female-only illnesses or experiences, much has gone under-researched and underreported.
This girl is showing us in this video her body transformation after getting on birth control. I'm not sure which birth control, but I assume it was the hormonal birth control, most likely the pill. We can see that she put some weight. I'm not really sure the time frame on these pictures, but let's talk about it. Does birth control makes you gain weight? The answer is no. I know, sis, but before you fight me, just hear me out. There's always a huge debate on this topic because we have some girlies that gain substantial amounts of weight after being on birth control while others lost weight. And I believe you girls. But based on several studies, apparently there's not necessarily a link between weight gain and hormonal birth control. Studies did find that high levels of estrogen caused by the pill can cause water retention, and we know fluid retention can cause bloating and puffiness. But everywhere you look, you can see that these studies are uncertain, that there's just not enough evidence because it's really hard to put together a group of women taking birth control and another group taking placebo, which is basically a fake pill. Supposedly, many women don't agree with doing these studies. Basically, there's not enough evidence out there. I don't know. This is all kind of sus. Maybe if we put more funding into doing more research on women's health issues, we could have known the exact answer to this question. But what did you guys think? Did hormonal birth control make you gain weight?
A 2022 study published in Frontiers in Behavioral Neuroscience found that out of 72 people, those who used oral contraceptives felt more fear, anger, and disgust than those who did not. Another study published in 2016 in JAMA Psychiatry found that hormonal birth control was linked with higher antidepressant use and depression as a whole. Birth control pills are also linked to increased activation in the prefrontal cortex during working memory processing for negatively arousing stimuli, like images of a gun, car accident, etc., which means that women who started using oral contraceptives during puberty or adolescence display a blunted stress response, meaning that they do not react to stressors as much as women who started taking oral contraceptives in adulthood. Women who started using oral contraceptives during puberty or adolescence also experience different brain activity during working memory processing of neutral images compared to women who started using oral contraceptives during adulthood. With Roe v. Wade overturned, mail-order abortion pills offer hope to many with early unwanted pregnancies, but that may soon change as attorneys general in 20 conservative-led states warned CVS and Walgreens that they could face legal consequences if they sell abortion pills by mail in their states. Most of these states have laws restricting abortion broadly, or the pill specifically, but the attorneys general said mail-order mifepristone also runs afoul of the Comstock Act. With the upcoming election, these issues will remain important talking points for both parties, though I imagine the Democratic Party will argue that these are issues important for pregnant people and womb havers, while Republicans will at least have the balls to admit that it's women's rights they're going after in the name of religion and family. All I can say is I'm not surprised at how things are going, and I hope that these important rights remain enshrined in law, as taking them away would be incredibly detrimental to women across the United States. This, dear viewers, is where we part. I first learned about the Comstock laws in detail during my women's history course in America prior this year when I was still in college, and I didn't know about this stuff, and I imagine that a lot of people who just aren't well informed about the history of feminism or women's rights in the United States also don't know about this. I mean, this is a law that has been basically moot, unused for a very long time, and it's going to be one of those points where you can see exactly why we need to update the American legal system, because it doesn't make any sense that a law that has been overturned like this, a law that is very, very much religious based, is going to be brought back into motion in the year 2024 simply because it's there as an option. If you guys have any comments, questions, or concerns, let me know in the comment section down below, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.